Hi, my name is Rory Schneider. I wrote a paper for one of my college classes on accumulators and their application in renewable energy distributed grid systems. And so I need practice giving speeches and using my laptop webcam. So I'm going to turn my paper into a speech just for practice. I have to keep pretty quiet because I'm in a library right now. So anyway, here we go. When I was first introduced to accumulators, it was through a renewable energy course that I was taking. They were brought up as a potential way to store energy for our homes. Now at this point, using accumulators to store energy, using accumulators to store energy for that is needed in the home is quite limited. But I believe the use of accumulators for storing energy for our homes has a bright future. I have several reasons for believing this, and I'll tell you. The first reason is distributed generation is going to be the way of the future. Power will be produced on a much more regional, local level, and the power production facilities will utilize whatever renewable resources are available in that specific area. Now, don't get me wrong, there will still be huge power production facilities like coal mines and nuclear power plants for all of the foreseeable future. But we're definitely going to see a major transition towards a distributed generation system. We have a dangerously outdated and vulnerable grid system in this country. You don't have to take my word for it. You can look it up or ask an electrician. It's old and it's rickety. And so when it fails us, and it does fail us, due to environmental disasters, equipment failures, or operator error, the results can be devastating. Our current grid system also makes us incredibly vulnerable to a terror attack. And with all of the ISIS stuff going on right now, you never know. That's a huge concern for us as a nation. If our grid goes down for more than something like 24 hours, shit starts getting wild and fast. I had to do a report for an electrical class about historic major power outages and their effects. And what I learned is that when the lights go out, people go batshit crazy. People die. It's bad. We practically live and breathe electricity, and without it, most people are utterly and pathetically helpless, including myself. I'm no exception. So one of the solutions is a distributed grid system. Now, in many cases, homes will power themselves with micro wind turbines, with solar photovoltaic panels, with solar thermal panels, geothermal energy, etc. Many homes will, instead of powering themselves, they will be on microgrids, whereby the power production facilities are sized to meet the demands of a single neighborhood, a single town, or a single county or region. Not like they are now. Like a single grid or distribution area will cover several states, an entire region like the Northwest or the Northeast or whatever. But we're going to start transitioning away from that in the future. So this sort of diversity, having a distributed grid system based on a lot of different types of renewable energy, this sort of diversity with all these different types of renewable energies will create a much more resilient grid. I gotta back up because this is worded probably not the best, and I'll tweak it later. So many homes will be on microgrids, whereby the power production facilities are sized to meet the demands of a single neighborhood, a single town, or a single county or region. This sort of diversity will create a much more resilient grid, or rather a plethora of interconnected microgrids. Instead of a single grid, we'll have a bunch of smaller grids that are all connected, whereby a major weather event or a terror attack could only knock out power across a single area instead of an entire state or region. With a grid system like that, you're producing power in so many different places. There's no way that anyone could shut down power over a large area. It would always be limited to certain little areas. So this model would also allow us to utilize whatever renewable energy source happens to be available in that particular region. Okay, now that's really important because a lot of people think that we're going to have a single solution to meet our energy demands, and unfortunately that's just not going to happen. There's no single renewable system that can cover the needs of energy currently for our country. And so we're going to have to rely on a very diverse amount of renewable energies. Now there are a dozen different sources from which we can reasonably harvest renewable energy, and that's what we're going to have to do. Happens to be the so, for example, solar photovoltaic. That's making electricity using those like blue or grayish colored solar panels on rooftops. That is appropriate for any region in the United States. You can look this up. Even in cloudy parts of the country, like Seattle, for instance, there's still enough sun exposure to justify solar. And in fact, Germany is leading the world in the application of solar, and they have really kind of poor sun exposure. They get a lot of clouds there, but they're still making it work. And so our entire country has better sun exposure than Germany does. So we have no excuse for not utilizing more solar panels because we have plenty of sunshine. Wind towers, both like the monster ones that you see, the huge white ones, and micro ones that are smaller that you might have in your yard, for instance, or in your neighborhood somewhere, they will produce most of the power for the Midwest, say, because it's really windy here, and lots of other areas where it's windy, of course. Coastal areas like the California and the East Coast and such will utilize a lot more tidal and wave power. The technology out there is really impressive. Like the San Francisco Bay, for instance, is a perfect area to apply a tidal power. And there's concerns with environmental impact of these systems and stuff. But when you weigh the negative effects of fossil fuels versus the minor effects on the environment that some of these renewable energy systems will have, it's clear that even though they have a certain amount of impact, there's still a way better option. For instance, like the wind turbines, we know for a fact they do indeed kill a certain number of birds every year, and that sucks, but it's still better than the alternative, which is basically burning coal until we all choke. So regions with geothermal energy geothermal activity will be able to harness that energy, and you'd be surprised, there are a lot of places throughout the United States that have a lot of geothermal activity, like hot springs and stuff like that, and the technology is out there to tap into that heat energy and use it to heat homes in the winter, and also to use that heat to make power. So the greatest thing about renewable energy in general is that we have so many options. We're not going to rely on just solar panels or just wind turbines. We're going to need to rely on every single one and apply them as best we can across the board. The only problem at this point is the cost, but that's only a matter of time, and that brings me to my second point. Currently, there's very little interest in storing energy for renewable off-grid type systems, simply because the cost of fossil fuels are still so cheap. So the only people right now that are living either completely off the grid with renewable energy systems and storage, or they have renewable energy systems that are linked to the grid. The only people that are doing that, for the most part, are people who have chosen to invest in it because they see the long-term benefits. But for your average American, it's not a good option. All of us are strapped. It's an economic, a long-standing economic downturn in this country, and no one's going for renewable simply because the cost of fossil fuels is so cheap. The oil and coal is just out there in the ground, and all you have to do is go dig it up or pump it out and sell it. It's cheap. Now, that's not calculating the toll on the environment, but I touch on that later. So luckily, though, in this country, in our culture, even around the world, we are starting to grasp the negative effects of fossil fuels, which include damaging our environment, obviously. A lot of people disagree with climate change and stuff like that, but it's actually taking place. I'm not going to go into it in great detail because the facts are out there. If you don't already follow this stuff, you should probably get on board because it's true. The facts are real. It's undeniable. So anyway, go to climatechange.gov and you can read all about it. Most of you here, to prove my point, I'll go off on a little tangent. So most of you people collectively agree that America is by far the greatest nation on the earth, and it's a good nation. I like it here, but we are not doing the best as far as our energy consumption, obviously. Now I'm losing my spot here. Sorry. So anyway, never mind. The environmental toll is out there. It's happening. The other reason that fossil fuels are so bad is because it has caused us to be involved in basically a never-ending war in the Middle East. And we know so the conflict in the Middle East is a whole nother can of worms that you can get into on your own. But I'm a veteran of the military, and so I've seen a lot of different things, and I study this stuff and I kind of follow it closely, and it's clear that a huge factor for us being in the Middle East is protecting our oil interests. And this country has done some really shiesty things in order to control the oil coming out of that region. We know that for a fact. And that's bad. And eventually we're going to have to stop doing that. It's not right. And it's causing a lot of countries to hate us, I think, which is bad. So anyway, the other reason that fossil fuels are so bad is because we know beyond a reasonable doubt that they're running out. They are. We used to only go after the easy stuff, the oil that was in shallow wells or off the coast in shallow water. Oh, what about the Deepwater Horizon? Well, we were drilling in deeper water than we ever drilled in before. We're continuing to go deeper and deeper, and we're continuing to go to regions around the world that are more dangerous, like the Arctic Circle and stuff like that. And areas in Alaska and stuff. It's like we're going to greater efforts to harvest fossil fuels. Why would we go to greater efforts if there were easy sources of fossil fuels to get? There are no more easy sources. They're running out. We're having to go deeper and deeper and further in order to keep up production. And look at the tar sands in Canada. Now that's a whole other thing I'm not going to get too far into, but we know it's as dirtier than coal. It's bad stuff. It's gross, and it's something that we never would have went after before. But now we have the technology, and the demand is greater than ever before, and the easy stuff, like I said, is running out. So anyway, moving on. So since this is the case, that fossil fuels are indeed running out, that means that the cost of fossil fuels is going to continue to climb higher and higher every single year until we basically hit a point where the renewable options become the obvious clear choice. Now, when I was taking a solar photovoltaic class at Cabrillo Community College in California, I learned that the national average for energy cost increase is about 7%. So that means that all of our utility bills go up by 7% every single year, no matter what. No matter what you do, no matter what's going on, the cost of utilities is going up every single year. And it's not tied with inflation, it's separate. I mean, it's increasing on its own scale. And so you can mark my words that that percentage, that 7%, that's going to increase dramatically over the next decade. Now, there are several different reasons for that, and I kind of touch on those later, but just know that currently it's at about 7% the last I checked, but it's going to dramatically increase over the next 10 years. And I'll explain why a little bit later. So my next point is okay, I need to describe what an accumulator is real quick. So a lot of people might not know. So an accumulator is any device or system that is set up to store power. So there's a number of different kinds. They function in different ways. You'll just have to look it up. But accumulators basically mean storing energy. It can be huge, it can be little, it doesn't matter. But it's an accumulator, it's energy that's stored for later. So as accumulator technology advances, there will be an increase in their efficiency. Now keep in mind that there are many different kinds of accumulators, and they too will need to be utilized based on which type is most appropriate for that area. Not all types of accumulators are going to work everywhere. That's why we need a variety of types so that we can use them where they are most appropriate. I started out with hydraulic accumulators because I'm taking a class on hydraulics right now, and so that was the project, was to talk about hydraulic accumulators. I got a little bit off track with this, but anyway, stay with me a bit longer. We're getting there. Okay, so now let's talk about powering a small town, for example. Now, if a small town is by a river, then pumping water up a hill into a pond, and then later draining the pond through a turbine to generate power, that might be the best option for that town. If it's in a hilly region next to a river, which is essentially my hometown, Beulah, North Dakota, is directly by a river, and there's hills on both sides. So you could easily use solar and wind energy to pump water up the hill into a pond when it's windy and when it's sunny and when it's dark outside and when the wind is not blowing. You can run that water back through a turbine and create power. So in that case, that's the best option for that area. That type of accumulator could potentially provide power for a whole neighborhood or maybe even the entire town during times when the sun is not shining and when the wind is not blowing. Now, if you live on a farm, for instance, there's a lot of farmers out there, and there's going to be a huge increase in rural and semi-rural farmers. I guarantee it. I'm not going to get into that right now. Just trust me. There's going to be a huge increase in like people kind of taking to the rural areas and like reoccupying all of these little towns across the Midwest and stuff. But yeah, anyway, that's a whole other can of worms. So for now, let's see, hold on. Okay, so if you live on a farm, for instance, perhaps a lifted weight type accumulator is the best option. Now, this accumulator might be the size of a small to medium-sized grain bin. Everyone in the Midwest region knows what a grain bin is, big round aluminum or steel container for grain. It could potentially be about that size, and imagine like a solid mass of concrete or something that is the size of a small grain bin lifted up 20 feet in the air. I don't know how to calculate the amount of energy that's stored in there. I'm sure there's a formula for it, but anyway, that is probably an impressive amount of power in one of those, and maybe you need a couple of them. I don't know the exact efficiency, etc., but the option is there. It is definitely there, and it's definitely a viable option. You could have a lifted weight on your farm, and it would work to power your home and everything that you need for livestock and such when the sun is not shining and when the wind is not blowing. It's a good way to store energy. Okay, my final reason for believing a distributed grid that utilizes accumulators is the way of the future is because as the cost of energy begins to rise more and more dramatically, as that 7% begins to go up and up and up, people will become way more frugal about their power consumption. Um, if we chose to be more efficient in this country, we could probably operate on just a portion of the amount of energy that we consume daily. I mean, think about all the power that we waste every day, like in our home, at work, everywhere. If you pay attention to it, you'll notice we waste a huge amount of power for no reason, just because we're wasteful, because it's cheap. So, simply the cost going up is going to drive people to be more sensible about how they use their power. They're going to be way more efficient, basically. They're going to say, turn those freaking lights off because the power bill is huge. You know what I mean? It'll just naturally happen. People will just they will change their habits and become more efficient because they don't want to pay that much for their power. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's going to cause us to start to change. Now, another driving factor towards efficiency and people being more efficient with how they use their power is going to be a matter of pride. Now, you probably didn't see that one coming. Pride. Here's an example. When people grow their own food, for instance, they're passionate about it. Now, this is something that I really enjoy doing, but you put a lot of time and effort into growing food. And it's a rewarding sort of experience. And so, since you put all that effort into your food and you have kind of an intimate connection with your food, it's not like you just bought it from the grocery store. It's like you planted that seed, you grew that carrot. You know, that causes you to be much closer to your food, and it makes it so that you're not going to waste it. Nobody that grows their own food likes seeing it go to waste. It's a shame. So they use what they can when it's ripe and fresh, and they preserve the rest by jarring it or canning it for the winter time. And if you have even more excess than what you can store for the winter or what you can use, then they give it to their neighbors. Now, you see where I'm going with this? So if you produce your own power, you don't waste it. If you use what power you need to use, and you store the rest, and if you generate an excess amount of power beyond what you can use and beyond what you can store, you guessed it, it goes to your neighbors. Boom, baby. Chisel that in stone. That is our energy future as I see it. Now, energy is linked to everything. You know, the only reason we're alive is because of the sun. It's energy. It's rays hitting the earth that causes the grass to grow. And then the cow eats the grass, and then we turn the cow into a fat hamburger patty. And we're fat and happy, okay? So energy is linked to everything. Energy gives us life. When energy costs go up, so do milk prices. It's all linked. So lucky for us, we have all the technology we need to make a smooth transition away from an outdated, vulnerable, centralized power production grid to a stable, distributed grid. Now, as the coal-fired power plants are shut down in the next coming decades, renewables will become the dominant form of energy, probably just behind nuclear. Now, I don't care for nuclear much, but it's better than coal, and it's actually way safer now than ever before. I know people are freaking out about Fukushima and stuff, and I mean that's crazy. That's a terrible disaster. But the engineering flaws that went into that place are obvious, and the safety features were lacking, and all this stuff. But that was easily an avoidable disaster. And we know better now, and the technology, even since that plant was constructed, nuclear technology is way beyond what they were using when that plant was established. So I don't like it, but it's better than coal. It's a reasonable option in order to help us transition from a centralized grid to a renewable one. But nuclear energy is still a centralized form of power. All the power is produced in one location, just like a coal mine, or a coal-fired power plant, rather. And you have to distribute that power through a huge grid, a high voltage across large distances. And so you have line losses, so you lose efficiency just because you are having to transport this energy such large distances. So it just makes way more sense to have a distributed grid. But like I said, nuclear energy will probably be necessary in order for us to make a smooth transition. Now, we could transition directly to renewables, and we could cut out coal and nuclear power, but it would probably be upsetting to a lot of people. I don't think it would bother me that much, but there's a lot of us that we would have to face real significant changes, and we'd have to face them real quick. If we keep the nuke plants running, we'll have a way smoother transition. So at this point, there's a lot of you that probably think I'm nuts for saying that we're going to shut down the coal-fired power plants. Now, I happen to be the son of a coal miner. I love you, Dad. I fully respect what you do. And so it's unfortunate for my dad, I guess, that, well, he's about to retire anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But the coal-fired power plants are basically going to be shut down in the coming decades because it's the dirtiest form of power production. And like I said earlier, we can no longer deny the fact that climate change is happening, and it's happening because of our excessive use of fossil fuels. That's just a fact. And so the shutting down of the coal-fired power plants is pretty much going to be one of the biggest driving factors behind our transition to renewables. As those plants start going offline, energy costs are going to skyrocket, and we're going to start making a transition towards renewable energy much faster than we're doing currently. Another factor that's going to push the renewable agenda, I guess, is going to be at some point, all of us are going to collectively accept the fact that we're in the Middle East for oil. Now, we're also in that region for a number of other reasons, trying to save the day, I guess, or attack them before they attack us, sort of thing, which I think is kind of bogus. But the main reason, we can safely say, the main reason is oil. And so, like I said, eventually we're all going to collectively agree that that's the main reason we're there, and that's not cool. And so, like I said previously, our country has done some shiesty things over there, and I personally don't want to see that continue. And as more and more people get on board with that idea, they're not going to want to see that shit continue either. And so eventually our protecting of our interests in the Middle East is going to end. And as that happens, that's also going to be a factor that dramatically increases the price of fossil fuels. Okay, I'm done. I would love your feedback. I'm not sure if I'm going to share this video or not. I might just keep it for personal use, but it was just for practice. So if I do share it, I hope you enjoyed it. I would love to get your feedback. Please be polite, though. We can agree to disagree. That's not a big deal. Okay, just be polite. Thanks. Peace.